Hidden beneath desert sands, the once dead empire of Nehekara stands once more, forced to return from the land of the dead by the great necromancer. The Tomb Kings have awoken to find themselves in a strange new world, one in which their calls for immortality have been answered, though it is with great regret that it is not the immortality that they desired. In the previous video I discussed the history of the Tomb Kings, from their empire's founding to the undead rising, and this video shall be a direct continuation of the last, instead focusing on the different aspects of the Tomb Kings. From what the kings did before being put back to sleep by Cetra, to the various units and constructs that they utilise on the battlefield. However, before this video starts, I do highly recommend that you watch the previous to understand what I am talking about, as there will be subjects in this that I will not cover again, and so as such may lead to some confusion. However, if you have watched the previous video or feel like continuing anyway, then feel free to do so, as this video will give closure as to what the Tomb Kings are. Though the Empire of Nehekara lays in ruin, the dead are rising yet again to see it once more, although for the restless dead, it has been a challenge. For the actual Tomb Kings, they have found themselves to be in a peculiar position. Where they were once owners of the entire empire, they may have been whittled down to nothing more than a few plots of land, and only owning the items that they had buried with them in their previous life. This includes their retinue of soldiers. This meant that it was a far cry from what they had been told about their afterlife. Instead of a paradise, they woke up to find themselves as rotting corpses, and as for the empire that they once helped build, to them, in the blink of an eye, it was destroyed. This is because, as you would expect with them being dead, there was no point in reference for them to pinpoint a time scale. So for most, what would be centuries or even millennia turned out to be mere seconds for them. Not only this, but other areas added to their confusion as well. Not only did they recognise that they and their advisors were nothing more than rotting flesh, they found out that their ancestors and their successors had come back from the dead as well. This immediately put all the Tomb Kings into panic mode, because there can only be one true king to rule over Nehekara, and so they and their retinue of soldiers fought each other up until Cetra arrived and subjugated every other Tomb King. This is where one of two things happened. Either the king would be subjugated and renounce his claims, or Cetra would kill them. If they were subjugated, Cetra ordered that they would be put back to sleep up until he needed them. But during the wars, if they were not on the battlefield, and before Cetra subjugated the rest of the Tomb Kings, they got to live out their lives. And for some, this was very difficult adjusting to their undead lifestyle. Some Tomb Kings were noted to be acting as if nothing was wrong, instead choosing to act out their lives as if they were indeed still alive. They would make their subjects continue to build their pyramids and statues, request the finest treasures that could be found, and request the finest foods and drinks that they could eat. But this presented an issue for them, for some could not quite grasp the fact that they were undead, and as they would consume their food and drink, it would simply fall out of their empty rib cages. This led to some kings going almost into a comatose state, as instead of acknowledging the fact that they couldn't eat the food, they would simply stare at it, day after day just staring at the food up until it rotted away into nothing more than dust, at which point they would snap out of their comatose state asking for more. And as for the servants, they had to do exactly what the king said. As the king would sit staring at his food rotting away, the servants sat in the corner waiting for the next orders. However, not all of the king's servants had to be with him during this time, as the mortuary cults may have more important issues to deal with. The mortuary cult is a collective of people who have dedicated their lives to finding the secrets of immortality. At least this used to be the case whilst they were still mortal. Whether it be through magical potions, they intended to extend the life expectancy for their rulers. Eventually this group became extremely secretive and secluded from the rest of society. However, they were still very well known to the public, and due to this secrecy it created an air of mysticism about them, and this slowly seeped out into Nehekaran society. Hence why you see a lot of statues and art centered around death. As for the members of the mortuary cult, they were known as the leash priests. Ever since Cetra, every king has had a leash priest by their side. This is because the kings quite literally could not live without them. For if a king were to kill one of them, the leash priest would not be able to extend their life expectancy any further. This effectively meant that the priest could control the kings and their actions, both in their life and in their afterlife. In the afterlife, the leash priests are the ones keeping their king alive. Not only their kings, but their entire armies as well. The priests are the ones that manage and maintain every single aspect of the undead in the Tomb King's roster. This means that if enough leash priests were to fall, entire dynasties would crumble into nothing more than mere dust. As such, the leash priests must ensure their survival, and perhaps the best way to ensure that they survive is through their magic. Whilst the Tomb Kings have been known to utilise dark magic thanks to Nagash's discoveries, the leash priests actually have have their own form of magic known as the Law of Nehekara. It is utilised by using long, monotonous chants that connect the mortal world to the realms beyond. Alongside being able to utilise this law of magic to perform various spells, it is also the way in which to connect the souls from the realm of souls to their statues, thus allowing souls from past heroes to come back once more to fight for Nehekara. And whilst the Lich Priests themselves are capable of performing magic to a great degree, all of the Tomb Kings have been imbued with magical powers, some more than others. Settra, as an example, is capable of performing magical feats. He is capable of channeling the winds of magic to perform spells from the Law of Nehekara. However, not all of his spells have to be manifested, as Settra's body itself is magical. This means that the winds of magic do not have to be directly accessed by Settra to incapacitate his enemies. During a battle with Norscan, Settra was struck down by his opponent. However, instead of collapsing to the floor with this fatal blow, his body exploded and from it came forth an insurmountable amount of scarabs. These scarabs scuttled across the floor, heading towards Settra's attacker. Digging into the flesh of the Norscan attacker, they shredded him down to the bone. However, another example of what is believed to be magic by others may not be the case. It has been said that there is a curse placed upon those who enter a Tomb King's home. Upon entering a tomb for whatever reason, once a person has left, they will start to become insane. They will have paranoid delusions that are so intense they will believe that anyone and anything is an enemy to them. This becomes so intense that they will actively try to kill. If they are not killed by those acting in self-defense, they may be put into an insane asylum, or they may just end their own lives. However, this isn't because of some magic spell that has actually caused them to become cursed. Whilst the kings were still alive, they were watching over the construction of their burial chambers. As they were watching, they would eventually ask their priest to put powder inside their chambers. This powder was psychoactive and was used in order to deter any tomb raiders. However, this isn't the only defense that the Tomb Kings utilised to defend their homes. Whilst the traps in the tombs deter most, it is the armies that are the first line of defence for the Tomb Kings. The composition of a Tomb King's army can vary. However, no matter which army you look at, they are all going to have the same fundamentals. The base component to any Tomb King's army are its skeleton warriors. These warriors faithfully served their king whilst they were still alive, and they continue to do so now even in death. Unlike the Tomb Kings and Lich Priests, the skeleton warriors have very little recollection of their past lives. The only parts of their lives that they do remember were faithfully serving their king, and even after all this time being dead, they still intend to serve their king to the utmost degree. And whilst the Lich Priests have brought them back to life, they have very little control over them. Instead, the skeleton warriors perform their actions freely. Every tactic and formation that they perform on the battlefield was what they learned in their previous lives. However, that isn't to say that they have free will. Their minds are foggy and clouded, and all they know is that they have to serve their king. And this is for all skeleton warriors, no matter their rank. But this also applies to most of the undead in the Tomb King's armies. Whether it be the skeleton horses that let their masters dutifully ride them into battle, or the flocks of carrion that use the desert's thermals to soar above their enemies, they all remember the small parts about their past lives, and this even includes the monstrous constructs that stride across the battlefield. Whilst these are just constructs, they have been infused with the souls of Nehekarans from the past. The statues are first built by those known as the Necrotechs and then infused with magic by the Lich Priests, at which point they are set free onto the battlefield or the tombs that need guarding. Many of the constructs have their own specific roles, much like the other units of the Tomb King's roster. For the Ushapti, they are typically designated to guard the inside of the tombs. The Tomb Scorpions lay under the sand, setting a trap for those who would charge into the Tomb King's army head-on, and the Kemrian War Sphinxes act like a battering ram, crushing their foes beneath their feet as they break the front lines. But not all the units are utilised on the battlefield to crush the enemies beneath their heel, for the Hyro Titan is utilised as a direct link between the mortal and undead realms. When striding across the battlefield, the Lich Priest will speak to the Hyro Titan, uttering incantations to destroy their enemies, whether it be allowing the enemies to sink into the sands, drowning, or to summon the swarm of locusts that will pick their flesh from their bones. The Hyro Titan is a direct link to the gods, but there is one other unit of the Tomb Kings that supposedly has a direct link to the gods. The Necro Sphinxes are a horrifying construct that can slice and dice through any enemy, and whilst on the surface it may look like they have a similar role to that of the Kemrian War Sphinx, it is instead a far more ferocious construct to contend with. The Necro Sphinxes are far more aggressive than any other construct, so much so that the Lich Priests are questioning if they have put a soul of a hero into the Necro Sphinx. or if the gods are controlling them directly themselves. And whilst this is great for any Tomb King's army, it also poses a potential threat, because the only thing protecting these Tomb Kings against these constructs is an incantation, and should it fail, who knows what havoc these Necrosphinxes could bring upon their own masters. However, this has yet to happen, as the Leash Priest incantations are powerful. But for as horrifying as these constructs may be, it is the Tomb Kings themselves that may be the most terrifying. The kings were tyrants back in their day, and they intend to continue being them now, and this is especially the case for Settra. He has subjugated many Tomb Kings, and as such has amassed an army that can take on almost any alliance, and so for the Tomb Kings, all they have to do is bide their time and wait for the opportune moment to strike. But fortunately enough for the Tomb Kings, the sands of time have paused. But who knows for how long? The Tomb Kings are an ancient race who were hell-bent on ensuring that they gained immortality, and though they achieved their goal, they were not careful with what they wished for, and are now forced to live in their collapsed empire as nothing more than rotting corpses. And though this may be a fallen empire, the kings of old wish to reclaim it. But this isn't just Settra and those underneath him. It might only be a matter of time before the great necromancer returns. And should this be the case, a new unspeakable horror shall be unleashed into the world.